So this story comes from just a long, long time ago, when I was just a little kid in elementary school. I had made some friends who lived in my neighborhood, which was fairly sizable, but not too big for a kid to ride a bike to get from one end to the other. I had been to my new friend's house once or twice before, but I was young and still unfamiliar with this part of the neighborhood. We had just moved in when I was about 6, so I ended up knocking on the doors of people on the way and asking people, "Do you know where Lance lives?" Also, yes, Lance did grow up to be just as douchey as his name predicted. Many who. I'm slowly making progress to where my friend actually did live, and on my way down the road I see a car parked on the side of the road in front of a house with people moving things from the car to the house. I go around it in the street since there weren't any cars coming out of the way, and the entitled grandmother makes her debut. Imagine a really old Karen with the classic haircut, but with curly white hair and a wrinkled up face. As I went around the driver's side of the car, she opens the door and I slam on my brakes. I was only 7 at the time and my bike wasn't really capable of going very fast, so I came to a stop rather quickly. She sees me stop just before a car door, which if I were going fast, she would have completely destroyed me with. That cliche car opening to stop a bike and move kind of thing, and just starts screaming her head off like, "What the F? Who are you? Where are your parents?" I'm taken aback by the sudden outburst and I couldn't really talk. I just sat on my bike, a little wide-eyed. She then says, "I'm trying to get to my little granddaughter's birthday party and you almost killed me. I want to talk to your parents right now. Where do you live?" I was too young to understand what a parent was. Parents are about as close to managers as you can get with children. Looking back, she was completely in the wrong here on so many levels, but I was young and an obedient kid who respected adults, as if their word was law practically. I felt like I was a ways from home. I wasn't, but it felt like it since I had stopped so many times along the way. So I just replied, "I live a long ways away," and pointed in the general direction of my house. She demands and says that I'm being a smart arse and raises a hand to slap me as she screams, "I need to know where." It's at this exact moment, too, that the homeowners come out and the first homeowner grabs the woman's arm before she can bring her down on me. In a true hold-me-back fashion, she starts weirdly squirming and spasming and like she's trying to break loose to beat my 7-year-old ass into the ground as I just sat there dumbly staring at the woman. She yells, "Let go, this little F tried to run me over." The first homeowner and the second homeowner look at me on my tiny bike and then back at this woman. "I don't think he did that on purpose, sweetheart. It looks like he just didn't look before opening your door. Be thankful it was just a kid and not another car." Nonsense. I came all the way to see my granddaughter for her birthday and this little shit almost kills me. I need to talk to his parents right now. I'll be suing them so hard this little shit will be legally enslaved to me to pay off his debt. And when I die, I can gift him to our granddaughter for her birthday. Hey, listen, lady, that's enough of that. The first homeowner slowly pulls the woman into the house as she screams nonsense. At the time, I had no idea what to do. Should I leave? Were the cops coming? Was I in trouble? I was so confused and just kind of lost, so even if I wanted to leave, it would take me a while to find my way home. The first homeowner came out a few minutes later and saw me still just sitting there. They walked out and handed me a cupcake and said, "I'm sorry how my mother-in-law treated you. Take this." My little eye sparkled a little and I destroyed that cupcake. I was a little upset afterwards, though, because I had some crumbs and icing on my hands that ended up getting on my handlebars, but I was overall happy at this point. The homeowner lived around the corner from my friend, so he gave me directions when I asked him about him. My head over and about 10 minutes later, this woman rings my friend's doorbell. My friend's mom answered the door while I was in the adjacent living room, so I overheard the conversation and it went something like this. "I know your son lives here. My daughter lives around the corner and your son almost hit me on his bike." She peers inside and sees me staring at her from a couch. There he is. My friend's mom thought that she was pointing at my friend, so she asked, "When exactly did this happen?" She says, 10 minutes ago. She says, "My son has been here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." She then says, "That's a lie. You're lying. I'm going to sue both of you." I'm coming in. This little shit needs some real discipline. And my friend's mom then says this conversation is over. She tried to close the door too, but this woman put a knife in the door to keep it open, all while screaming bloody murder and moving the knife up and down to try and cut my friend's mom. As an inside, the knife was probably used to cut a cake at the birthday party because there was icing on it, and subsequently the door frame too. My friend's mom ended up calling her husband who wasn't home and said, "Honey, get the shotgun, kill this old bitch." And the bluff worked. And at that moment, I think reality stuck this woman and she dropped the knife and she just ran about as fast as you'd expect an older person to be able to run. My friend's mom called the police and she told them what had happened, where we were and what this woman looked like. I spoke up and told them where I'd first seen this woman pointing at the house through a window. It was obvious too, since only one house was holding a party. About 9 minutes passed before the police arrived and I stayed at the house for obvious reasons. But the police started asking me questions and making sure that I was okay when I heard a muffled call over the radio. A lot of the police officers ran from my friend's house to the house that I'd pointed out, and I stared out the window as I saw this woman get tackled to the ground from behind. I did some digging too, and the police report says that she was tased before being tackled and cuffed because she had attacked an officer who tried to move her to a squad car. In the end, sweet, savory justice was served. Well, maybe that was just the homoness cupcake. Either way, though, it was sweet, and I had an awesome story for my other school friends. So here's a little bit of background info about my family. We bought our house 3 years ago when my son was like 1. He started talking really well right after he turned 2. His speech went from being like 1 to 2 words at a time to short but complete sentences or phrases. I also quit my job away from home to work from home around this time in order to be able to stay with him. I started teaching him English online and nannying a little boy. This is important too because the little boy helps validate my son's experiences. So I noticed my son has always stared and waved at nothing and all the other creepy stuff the babies do. But this was different. One day he started randomly looking down the hallway and whining and crying. I asked him what he was crying about and he said it's scary. So I asked him what he was scared about and he said the bear. At this point I thought that maybe he saw one of his stuffed animals in his room that scared him and he was remembering it because you actually can't see into his room from the hallway. So I asked him, "Honey, what does the bear look like?" He stared at the same spot for a minute and then said it's big and it's black. Like a lot of other people, I'm not a skeptic and I've had a lot of paranormal experiences in my life, so I immediately believed him. He started crying again and ran back towards me. But fast forward like a week and he's been doing this every day now, and one day I was watching the little boy that I nannied and he too started creeping around the hallway looking at something. My son looked at the same spot and they simultaneously started crying at the same time and they both ran to me. This is when I asked my son where it was, and he pointed to the hallway. I couldn't see anything, and after a minute he pulled on my dress and said, "Mommy, bear in there now." Talking about the room, that was my office back then. So I just sort of held both of their hands and walked towards the room, and they let go when we got there. I went inside the room, and again I couldn't see anything. Meanwhile, they wouldn't go in there. Instead, they were peering around the doorway, crying. Honestly, whatever the thing was starting to tick me off too, because scaring my baby and his best friend was not cool. I had my mom come over a few days later, and we did a cleansing with sage. We also used a candle that you were supposed to blow out at the end to complete the ritual. My mom asked my son to blow it out, since the activity seemed to be centered around him. He tried to do it about 5 times, and the flame would flicker, but for some reason would just never go out. So we redid the cleansing, and he was able to blow it out this time. He saw the bear again every few weeks or months, and we would do a cleansing each time, and it would go away temporarily. My son is 4 now, and he will still randomly mention this bear, especially if he's scared before bed. He'll say something like, "Are you sure that there are no monsters, not even the bear?" I have a 1-year-old daughter now, and her bedroom is the same room that used to be my office, and she'll randomly say, "Hey, it's nothing," and stuff like that, just like my son did. I'm not really looking for advice because I'm pretty used to this kind of stuff, but I thought that I would just share this to get it off my chest a bit. I was 14 years old when I had to live with my grandparents. I had to live with them because my sister was in college and my parents were now divorced. They lived in this sort of old bungalow-type house. It was one story, and we have the upstairs that immediately goes up to the attic. An attic which no one really uses. We just put stuff in there. I mean, it's just too hot and stuffy to be up there for too long. The sole window up there didn't really work too, but the attic had old creaky wooden floors that I remember that I had to polish with a coconut shell because that's how we would do it here in the Philippines. That and my grandparents were just very traditional. Anyways, but my door room was near the stairs leading up to the attic. Like, you open my door and then face right, and the stairs would be immediately right there. I really hated that too every time that I left my room because I would expect that something would be immediately crawling down from the attic or something. One night my parents had to go and pick up my aunt's family from the airport, but because of the terrible traffic here, they had to leave at 7 p.m. and their expected arrival back home time would be at most 5 a.m. And so I, a 14-year-old girl, would be alone at home the whole time. I told them that I would be fine here. I mean, we lived in a gated community and we had tons of guard dogs. Everything should be fine. So I thought. Before they left, we had already had dinner, so I was just stuck with cleaning the dishes and all that. And I was doing that. I could hear a bunch of neighboring dogs barking a lot at something. I didn't really think much of it because the dogs always do that anyway. But when I finished cleaning up from dinner, I immediately had to lock every door and window and close all the lights before heading to bed. When I entered my room, the lights were open and looked normal. My anime posters were on the wall, my closet was untouched, my bed was next to my bar, tinted windows. We had to tint them because I was on the first floor and my grandparents wanted to make sure that no one would peep in on a young girl's room. They were barred too because my uncle, who used to use the room, always escaped through there to go to parties and whatnot. This was my grandparents' solution to that. But nothing was out of place to alarm me. Everything was normal until I turned the lights off. As soon as I turned the lights off, silhouette of a man was illuminated by the street lights outside. He looked like he had thick curly hair and a skinny build. I thought that I must be hallucinating, so I turned the lights back on, but he was gone. Turned them off again, and he was back again. On again and gone, and off again and gone. I sort of sighed in relief at that. I must have just been seeing things, or something else was casting a shadow or something. But I double-locked my door just to be safe. One with the door knock lob and one of those door latch type things, and then after that I just tucked myself in for a good night's sleep. It was hard to fall asleep that night, though, when a lot of dogs were barking outside. They weren't our dogs, obviously. It was a neighbor's dogs, but still, they just kept barking and barking. It was finally falling asleep, too, when I heard something from above me moving. Something in the attic. I pushed down the thought. I must have just been tricking myself again, hugged my pillow. It's just rats, I said to myself. But these rats seemed mighty heavy and were also pushing furniture around by the sounds of things. My heart sank when I heard them hurriedly go down the stairs and stop at the bottom. I covered myself with my blankets and I waited for something. I was also wishing at that time that my parents would have given me a phone, but I only waited in bated breath. When suddenly I heard my door being gently fiddle. I wanted to vomit when I heard a click, followed by a quiet turn of the knob. The knob turned, but it didn't budge. It was on the other side when they noticed this. They tried to push it. This time I had finally stood up, shaking. I was a kid, home alone with no phone, no means of defense. All that was between me and whoever this was this thick door from the old days. I softly pushed my body up against the door, locked everything up again. I didn't want to make a sound. I tried not to. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want him to know that I was in here. I don't know why he stopped too, but eventually he did. I didn't go back to bed that night. I just sat there at the door, waiting, and it felt like forever. But eventually I heard footsteps go up the stairs, but I still sat there. Eventually I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, because there, at the window, that shadow was now back. I forced myself not to look. All I could think was, thank God that they were barred. I really don't remember what happened after that, too. I think I must have fallen asleep, or I was just too scared to even think straight. All I really remember was the next day when my family and I were finally having breakfast. I casually brought it up. I said "lo," which means grandfather. I think I heard footsteps up in the attic last night. And my grandmother just scoffed and said, "It's probably just rats." I never really brought it up again too after that because I just didn't want them to worry. But I do know this. Our dogs were caged up near the gate and were far from my home, so they wouldn't have seen anything. The only dogs who were near my room were the neighbors that night. Also, the next day I went to check to see what was outside of my window, and there was nothing outside of it that could have cast a shadow that looked like a man. And lastly, when I went up to check the attic window, it was wide open. Back in 2013, I was moving from Florida to Kentucky for a new job with a close friend that I grew up with. It's about a 15-hour drive, so we decided to leave around 6 p.m. and drive straight through to get to Kentucky the next morning. The route takes you through Atlanta and then along a sort of dark stretch of mountains in Tennessee where there are no exits, no cell service, and it's very steep. There is also about an hour-long drive where there are signs everywhere that say "no Jake brake" and "no braking downhill when you're in the mountains." While driving, it honestly feels very dangerous going downhill, and this was in November and the roads were very slick at night. So it was about 3 a.m. though, and while I was driving and my friend was in the passenger seat just sleeping. While we were coming down one of the mountains and up ahead, I see a bright light that is slowly getting bigger as I approach. And soon I realize that what I'm seeing is actually a car fully engulfed in flames in the left lane at the bottom of the hill. I yielded my friend to wake up so we can figure out what the heck to do. Obviously, if anybody is in the car, they could not have survived that, and we were definitely not equipped to help. It also seemed like a dangerous idea to stop the car because it was at the bottom of the car so late at night. I mean, the car was literally engulfed in flames, and I barely saw it until I was close up to it. As we're trying to figure out what to do next, we both realize that neither of us actually have cell service here. But we see a sign for a gas station 2 miles up the road. We get to said gas station and tell the guy working there about what happened. He tells us, unfortunately, that this is something that happens from time to time and that he would call a state troop before us, so we could tell him exactly what happened and give any information that we could. It's then 10 minutes later, too. The trooper pulls up and we tell him exactly what happened. But he's really confused because he says that to get to the gas station to meet us, he was driving the same direction that we were driving, and there were no other exits for 15 miles, and it would have been impossible for him to miss a flaming car. And after a few minutes of us basically arguing with this guy about what we saw and assuring him that we weren't on any drugs and hadn't been drinking, we travel south with him following us to the location of the accident. And sure enough, when we get there, there's no burning car there. No car at all, in fact. To this day, me and my friend are sure of what we saw. I mean, we passed within maybe 10 feet from the car itself. 1 lane over. We clearly saw a burning car. But apparently it never happened.